In late June of 1983, in Lancaster County, Nebraska, a man named Walter Hensley stood at the edge of a soybean field that should have been dead. The leaves were wrong. Too green, too full, too alive. Across the gravel road, every other field had already begun to curl in on itself. The first signs of soybean aphids spreading like a quiet fire through the county. Farmers were talking about yield losses as high as 40%. Some said worse. Sprayers were running day and night. Chemical drums stacked like barricades beside machine sheds. But Walter's field didn't match the pattern. Not one leaf curled. Not one plant sagged. And by the time the county extension agent pulled his pickup to the shoulder that morning, a small crowd had already gathered. Men in seed caps, a banker in press slacks, 2 dealers from Lincoln. They stood with their arms crossed, staring out over something none of them could quite explain. Walter didn't say much. He never did. 72 years old that summer. 50 years on the same 160 acres his father had bought in 1932 for $6,400 during the worst of the Depression. His boots were cracked. His hands moved slow, not weak, just deliberate, like every motion had already been decided before it happened. He stepped down between the rows and turned a leaf over. There they were, aphids, dozens of them, but something else too, tiny, moving, hunting. And that's when the banker laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not the kind you use when you don't understand something. This one came sharp, loud, meant to be heard. "Walter," he said, loud enough for everyone, "you still running that bug nonsense? You expect insects to save a crop?" A few of the others joined in. Not cruel, just certain. Certain they were looking at an old man who hadn't kept up. Walter didn't look up right away. He just kept studying the leaf, then brushed it gently with his thumb. "They're already working," he said. That only made it worse. The banker shook his head. "You're going to lose this field like the rest of them. Only difference is you won't even know why." Walter nodded once, not agreeing, just acknowledging the words had been said. "Maybe," he said. "Let me tell you about Walter Hensley. He wasn't always the bug farmer. That name came later and not kindly. In 1949, when he was 28 years old, he bought his first new tractor, a Farmalem, red, paint still bright, 38 horsepower, weighing just over 5,300 pounds. Cost him $1,900 from a dealer in Lincoln who didn't think he'd ever pay it off. Walter did, every cent. That tractor plowed every acre he owned for decades. Spring after spring, steel cutting soil that had seen drought, flood, and everything in between. He learned the land the way some men learn people. Quietly, over time. And sometime in the early 1960s, he started noticing something most men ignored. Fields that were sprayed the hardest seemed to get weaker. Not right away, but over years. Less life in the soil. Fewer birds. Fewer earthworms when he turned the ground. He didn't have the language for it then. No one did. Not in Lancaster County. Not in 1962, but he'd paid attention. Let me tell you about the summer of 1967. That was the year a different pest hit. Armyworms. They move fast. Stripped fields overnight. Men sprayed everything they had. Some sprayed twice. Walter sprayed once, then stopped. Not because he didn't care, because he noticed something else. After the first spray, the worms came back thicker, but in the corners of his field, where the sprayer had missed, something was eating them. Birds, beetles, things most farmers never bothered to name. That's when the idea took hold. What if the field could fight for itself? He didn't talk about it much. Not at first. Just small changes. Leaving strips unsprayed. Letting certain weeds stand. Watching what lived there. People noticed, and they laughed. They called him the bug farmer before they understood what that meant. Back in 1983, standing in that soybean field, with aphids crawling and something else hunting them, the laughter sounded the same. The extension agent stepped forward, kneeling beside Walter. He adjusted his glasses, leaned in close. "Those are lady beetles," he said quietly. "Larvae, too." Walter nodded. The banker folded his arms tighter. "So what? You got bugs eating bugs. That's not a plan. That's luck. Walter finally looked up. No, he said, that's balance. The word hung there, uncomfortable, unproven, and completely out of step with everything modern farming had become by 1983. Spray schedules, input costs, yield projections calculated down to the acre. Balance didn't fit into any of that. The wind shifted. You could hear it move through the leaves. Walter's leaves, still green, still standing. Have you ever owned something that everyone else called worthless? Something people laughed at because it didn't fit the way things were supposed to work? Because standing there that morning, Walter wasn't just defending a field. He was standing alone against an entire way of thinking. And the strange part was the field didn't seem to care who was right. The insects kept moving, hunting, working. And by the time the banker turned back toward his truck, still shaking his head, there was something in that field he hadn't expected to see. Movement, not collapse, not damage. Something else. Something that didn't follow the rules he trusted. Walter brushed one more leaf between his fingers. They're not done yet, he said. And neither was the field. By the first week of July 1983, the reports coming out of Lancaster County weren't getting better. They were getting worse. Aphid populations had doubled in less than 10 days. Some fields were showing damage so severe that extension estimates started using words farmers hated to hear out loud. Partial loss, severe reduction. In a few cases, total failure. Sprayers ran constantly. You could hear them at night. Engines humming under floodlights. Men chasing a problem that never seemed to stay in one place long enough to kill. Chemical costs climbed fast. $30 an acre. Then $40. Some men pushed past $50, desperate to stay ahead of it. And still the aphids came back. Let me tell you about modern farming in the early 1980s. It was efficient, precise, built on control. You didn't wait for problems. You prevented them. Scheduled sprays. Timed applications. The idea was simple. Eliminate the threat before it had a chance to grow. But there was a catch. The more you eliminated, the more you depended on doing it again, and again, and again, because you weren't just killing the pest. You were killing everything else too. Predators. Balance. The quiet systems no one saw, because they didn't come with a price tag. Walter had seen it coming for years. He just never said it loud enough for anyone to listen. Back on his farm, the work didn't look impressive. No new equipment. No high-clearance sprayers. Just that same 1949 Farmel M. Paint faded now. Engine rebuilt twice. Still pulling steady. He used it to cultivate, not just plant. To manage weeds mechanically instead of chemically. Slow work. Precise work. The kind most men had abandoned by 1983 because it took time they didn't think they could afford. And in the evenings, Walter walked. Not to check damage. To observe. Rows. Leaves. Insects. Patterns. The field wasn't silent. It never had been. Most farmers just stopped listening. The banker came back on July 9th. This time he didn't bring a crowd. Just himself. He stood at the edge again, hands on his hips, looking out over something that no longer made sense to him. Because while his clients were calling him about operating loans and yield losses, Walter's field still stood. Not perfect, but holding. You didn't spray, the banker said. No. You didn't treat. No. The banker stepped down into the rows, same as before. He turned a leaf, then another. Aphids were still there, but fewer. And the hunters, more. How? He asked. Walter took his time. They eat, he said. The banker exhaled through his nose. Not laughing this time. Just frustrated. That's not an answer. It is if you watch long enough. Let me tell you about something most people misunderstand. Power. Not horsepower. Not engine size. Real power in the system. Because here's the truth most men in that county hadn't been told. Killing something is fast. But building something that can survive on its own takes longer than most people are willing to wait. That's what Walter had done. Over years. Quietly. He hadn't eliminated pests. He had built a field that could respond to them. And now, in a summer when control was failing everywhere else, response was the only thing left. The banker walked deeper into the rows. Slower now. Paying attention. He saw it. Movement everywhere. Not chaos. Interaction. Balance. Have you ever known you were right when everyone in the room said you were wrong? Not because you were louder, but because you had seen something they hadn't. That was Walter. Not arguing. Not proving. Just waiting. The banker stopped beside him. "If this works," he said carefully, "you understand what that means?" Walter nodded once. "It means I don't have to fight the field," he said. "It'll do the work." The banker looked back toward the road, toward the other fields, toward numbers he understood better than anything growing in front of him. "But what if it doesn't?" he asked. Walter's answer came simple. "Then I lose like everyone else." No fear in it, just truth. The wind moved again, softer this time. The leaves didn't curl. They shifted, alive. The banker stayed longer than he planned, long enough to stop looking for proof and start looking for understanding. But understanding comes slow, and the rest of the county wasn't waiting, because by mid-July something changed, not in Walter's field, in everyone else's. The sprays stopped working, not completely, but enough. Aphids surged again, stronger, resistant, and the calls that started going out weren't about treatment anymore. They were about survival. And for the first time that summer, men who had laughed started looking across the road at the one field that hadn't followed the rules, the one field that hadn't collapsed, the one field that, somehow, was still standing. The banker got back in his truck. He didn't say anything when he left, but the way he looked at Walter before closing the door had changed. Not respect yet, but something close, because what he had just seen didn't fit into any system he trusted. And systems don't break quietly. They break all at once. 3 days later, the county called an emergency meeting, and they asked Walter Hensley to speak. What he said there would decide everything. The meeting was held on July 14, 1983, inside the Lancaster County Extension Building, a low brick structure just outside Lincoln that had seen drought meetings, price collapses, and more quiet desperation than anyone ever wrote down. That afternoon, every folding chair was filled. Farmers, dealers, 2 representatives from a chemical company out of Des Moines, the same banker, sitting in the second row now, not at the back, not leaning, listening. Walter stood near the front, not behind the podium, just off to the side, hat in his hands, like he hadn't quite decided whether he belonged there. Let me tell you about rooms like that. They don't forgive uncertainty. Every man there had money on the line. Some had borrowed against next year already. Some were watching seasons slip away acre by acre. They didn't want philosophy. They wanted answers they could use before morning. The extension agent cleared his throat. "Mr. Hensley's field is currently the only documented case in the county maintaining stable yield projections without chemical intervention," he said. "We've asked him to explain his methods." There was a shift in the room. Not belief. Attention. Walter stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. "I didn't do anything this year," he said. A few heads tilted. Someone muttered. He went on. "I started 20 years ago." That quieted them. And for the next few minutes, Walter did something most men there had never seen him do. He told the story. Not all at once. Not fast. Just pieces. Observations. Years of watching what happened when you left parts of a field alone. What returned. What disappeared. What depended on what. No big words. No charts. Just truth built from time. Let me tell you about the one part that mattered most. Walter stopped halfway through, looked out over the room, and said, "You're trying to win a fight." Silence. "You kill them," he said. "They come back. You kill them again. They come back stronger. Because you're the only thing holding them back." He paused. But if something else holds them back. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The room understood. Not fully, but enough to feel the shape of it. One of the chemical reps stood up, clean shirt, confident. "With respect," he said, "there's no data supporting large-scale yield protection through unmanaged predator populations. You're describing an uncontrolled system." Walter nodded. "It is," he said. The rep smiled slightly. "That's not a solution." Walter met his eyes. "It is if it works." The room shifted again. Not laughter this time. Tension. Because for the first time, the question wasn't whether Walter was wrong. It was whether everyone else had been. Have you ever sat in a room where the truth started to turn and you could feel it before anyone said it out loud? That was that moment. The banker leaned forward. Elaborate, he said. Walter did something then he hadn't done before. He explained it, not in theory, in plain language. Here's the part most men never hear clearly. Horsepower gets talked about like it's everything. Bigger engine, bigger number, more power. But horsepower is speed. It's how fast work gets done. Torque is different. Torque is what keeps something moving when it hits resistance. Old machines, like that Farm-LM, weren't built to go fast. They were built with heavy cast iron, long strokes, steady torque. They didn't stall when things got hard. They pulled through it. Fields work the same way. Modern systems chase horsepower. Fast results. Immediate control. Walter had built torque. A system that didn't collapse when pressure hit. A system that absorbed it, responded to it, kept moving. He finished, and the room didn't clap. It didn't argue. It just sat there, processing. The banker stood up slowly. If what you're saying is true, he said, then we've been weakening our own fields for years. Walter didn't answer, because that wasn't his job. Understanding had to come from the people who needed it. The meeting ended without resolution. No policy changes. No official recommendations. Just a room full of men walking out quieter than they walked in. But something had shifted. You could feel in the way they looked at each other. In the way they looked at Walter. Not as a curiosity. Not as a joke. As a possibility. Outside, the air was thick with heat. Engines started. Trucks pulled away. The banker didn't leave right away. He walked over to Walter. I laughed at you, he said. Walter nodded. I know. I was wrong. Walter shook his head slightly. Not wrong, he said. Just early. The banker let out a breath. Something in him settling. What do I do now? He asked. Walter looked out toward the road. You start small, he said, and you watch. The banker nodded, not fully understanding, but willing. And sometimes that's where change begins. That night, for the first time all summer, a few sprayers stayed parked. A few fields were left alone. Not many, but enough. And in those fields, something quiet began to happen. Something most men wouldn't notice right away. Something that didn't look like control. Something that looked like patience. By the end of July, the county reports started changing. Not dramatically, just enough. Some fields stabilized. Not all, but some. And every one of them had something in common. They had stopped fighting. Walter walked his rows at evening. Same as always. Same pace. Same silence. He turned a leaf. Watched. Waited. And for the first time all season, he smiled. Because the field wasn't just surviving anymore. It was correcting itself. And once a system learns how to do that, it doesn't forget. By September of 1983, the difference was no longer subtle. It was measurable. Combines rolled through Lancaster County under clear skies, cutting yields that told a story no one could ignore. Fields that followed the full spray schedules averaged 30 to 35 bushel per acre, some dipping lower where aphids had surged late. Costs had eaten into whatever remained. Walter's field came in at 48 bushels per acre. Not a miracle, just steady. But the real number wasn't yield. It was cost. He hadn't spent the extra $40 per acre chasing a problem his field had learned to manage. And for men who had borrowed to survive that season, that difference mattered. It mattered a lot. Let me tell you about what changed after that harvest. Not everything. Not right away. Farming doesn't turn on a single season. But conversations did. Men who had laughed started asking questions. Quiet ones at first, then longer ones. Coffee shop talk shifted from what we spray next to what happens if we don't. The banker changed too. His name was Frank Donnelly, 39 years old in 1983, educated, efficient, the kind of man who trusted numbers because numbers had never lied to him before. He came back that fall with a notebook, not to inspect, to learn. Walter didn't treat him any different than anyone else. They walked the field together. Frank asked questions. Walter answered some. Let others sit. That winter, Frank approved 3 operating loans with condition no one in his office had ever written before. Reduced chemical input, observation logs, gradual change. His colleagues questioned it. He didn't argue. He just pointed to the numbers. 5 years later, in 1988, nearly a third of the farms in that part of Lancaster County had adopted some version of what Walter had been doing quietly for 2 decades. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to matter. Let me tell you about the machine. That 1949 Farmel M was still running. Same engine block, same steel frame, rebuilt carburetor, new rings in 1976. Another set in 1989. It didn't look impressive parked next to newer tractors with enclosed cabs and air conditioning, but it started every time. Pulled steady. Did the work. Walter never replaced it. Said he didn't need to, because it wasn't about what it could do fast. It was about what it would keep doing no matter what. In the spring of 1992, Walter turned 79. He planted one more crop. Same way, same pace. He walked the rows that summer, slower now, but still watching, always watching. He died in November that year, quietly, in his sleep. No headlines, no speeches, just a man who had understood something early and waited long enough for the world to catch up. His daughter, Elaine, took over the farm. She kept it going, not because it was easy, because it worked. Frank Donnelly retired in 2005. At his retirement dinner, he told a story most people in that room had heard pieces of but never all at once. About a man they had laughed at. About a field that didn't collapse. About the moment he realized control wasn't the same as strength. He didn't use big words. Just one sentence that stayed with the people who heard it. I learned more from one quiet farmer than I did from 20 years of numbers. And the machine? That Farmel M still runs. Elaine uses it every spring to cultivate the same fields her father walked. Same steel cutting the same soil, carrying the same understanding forward. Not as nostalgia, as proof. Proof that some systems don't need replacing. They need remembering. Have you ever seen something dismissed, only to watch it outlast everything that replaced it? Because that's what happened here. Not just with a tractor, not just with a field, with an idea. Something small, something patient, something most people were too busy to notice until it was the only thing left working. The land didn't change. The insects didn't change. What changed was how one man chose to work with them instead of against them. And in the end, that choice didn't just save a crop. It changed how an entire county thought about farming. Walter never raised his voice. He never needed to. The field said everything for him. Some systems aren't built to win fights. They're built to outlast them. If you ever known someone like Walter, someone who trusted something quiet when everyone else trusted noise, I'd like to hear about them. Tell me their story in the comments. I read everyone. And if you want to hear about the farmer in Iowa who ran the same combine for 37 harvests after the dealer told him it wouldn't last 5, that story is coming. You'll want to be here for it.